Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to jump in.
Well, today we're tackling something I think a lot of us can relate to. Public speaking.
Yeah.
Or really any kind of speaking where you got to be, on.
Definitely. And we've got a fantastic guide for this one. Brian Tracy's Speak to Win.
This book, seriously, it's like a masterclass in communication.
Yeah, Tracy doesn't just focus on big speeches. He breaks down how to be confident and persuasive in any situation.
Which is something we all need, right? Whether it's a big presentation at work or just speaking up in a meeting. Have you ever felt those butterflies in your stomach when you got to talk in front of people?
Oh, I think everyone has at some point. It's actually incredibly common.
Yeah.
Tracy says, get this, over half of adults are more afraid of public speaking than death.
More than death. Wow. Okay, that makes me feel a little less weird about my own stage fright.
It's a natural response. Even pros get nervous. The key, though, is learning how to manage those nerves.
Right. Turn those butterflies into something you can actually work with. And Tracy has this whole approach based on what he calls verbalization, visualization, and emotionalization. Sounds kind of complicated, but I'm guessing it's more straightforward than it seems.
Oh, definitely. It's about taking control of your mental game before you even step up to speak.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
So first up is verbalization, which is basically positive self-talk.
So instead of, I'm going to totally mess this up, I should be telling myself, I got this, I'm going to rock it.
Exactly. You're essentially giving your brain a pep talk. It's like training yourself to focus on success instead of failure.
Makes sense. And then there's visualization, right? Like picturing yourself giving this amazing knock it out of the park speech. This reminds me of something Tracy calls the end of the movie technique. He says if you know a movie's going to have a happy ending, the whole experience is more enjoyable. You can relax more.
Oh, yeah, I love that analogy.
So if you visualize yourself giving this awesome speech, knowing it's going to end well, you can actually reduce your anxiety. It's like visualizing the audience giving you a standing ovation at the end.
Exactly. You create this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. And then there's the emotionalization part.
Emotionalization. So this is about actually feeling confident before you speak, not just thinking it.
Exactly.
Oh, just
Think of things like power posing or listening to music that pumps you up. The idea is to get your body into the right emotional state before you speak.
It's like method acting for public speaking.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's say we've got our mental game down. What about those first few seconds when you actually start speaking? Tracy talks about how crucial introductions are.
Oh, absolutely. First impressions are everything, right?
Totally.
Tracy says audiences make decisions about you in seconds.
Seconds. No pressure there, right?
Nope, no pressure at all. So a really well-crafted intro is key.
So how do we make that happen?
Well, Tracy's big on building anticipation. You want to highlight your accomplishments or expertise before you even reveal the title of your talk or, your name.
It's like a movie trailer. You got to hook them before they even know what they're about to see.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
Okay, I'm getting this. But can you give us an example of what that might sound like? Like in the real world?
Sure. Tracy gives this great example of a speaker who starts by saying, I started 22 businesses and made over $1 million in 8 of them.
Okay, I'm hooked. Sign me up for that seminar. That's a great example because you instantly establish credibility.
Right. You're not just some random person. You've got a track record.
So the audience is thinking, this person knows their stuff. I need to listen.
Exactly. But now let's think about those smaller speaking situations that we all face way more often than, giving a TED Talk, like meetings.
Oh, meetings.
Right. Tracy actually puts a lot of emphasis on making the most of those everyday interactions. He says careers are often made or broken in small meetings.
That makes so much sense, though. It's where we got to persuade people, get our ideas across, build relationships. Meetings are like mini speeches in a way.
Exactly. And to help us navigate those situations, Tracy gives this framework called the 6 A's for making people feel important.
6 A's. Okay, lay it on me.
All right, here they are. Acceptance, appreciation, admiration, approval, attention, and agreement.
Wow, that's a mouthful. I have to admit, sometimes in meetings, I get so focused on the agenda or the task at hand that I forget about the human element.
It's easy to do, but the 6 A's are a good reminder that even in a professional setting, people have a fundamental need to feel valued. It's not about being fake or manipulative. It's about genuine human connection.
Right, right. So of those 6 A's, which ones do you think have the biggest impact in our everyday interactions?
That's a great question. 2 that really stand out to me are appreciation and admiration.
Okay, let's start with appreciation. What does that look like in practice?
Think about it this way. When was the last time someone genuinely thanked you for your work? Really meant it, didn't make you feel good, like you were seen.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing how much power a simple thank you can have. But what about admiration? Isn't there a risk of coming off as insincere or, trying too hard?
There's definitely a fine line there. But Tracy really stresses being genuine. He's not talking about flattery. He's talking about recognizing and acknowledging people's strengths.
So it's got to be specific and sincere, not just throwing out generic compliments.
Exactly. And it can be as simple as saying something like, I was really impressed with your presentation. Your insights on topic were spot on, and I especially appreciated how clearly you explained everything.
Ooh, I like that. You're showing them that you were actually paying attention and that you value their contribution. So we've got the mental game figured out. We know how to make a good first impression. But let's say we're in a meeting. We're trying to get our idea across. How do we persuade people without being, pushy or manipulative? It's a tough balance, right?
It is, and Tracy's approach is all about lowering resistance. He says you want people to feel like they're winning, even if they're making concessions.
Interesting.
He talks about the importance of starting with areas of agreement, building momentum, and trust before you get to the tougher points.
So like you're disarming people with niceness before you get into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. Tracy even shares this anecdote about how he negotiates contracts. He starts by agreeing to everything that's, non-controversial.
Really?
Yeah. This creates a positive vibe, so by the time you get to the more difficult stuff, there's already goodwill.
That's pretty clever. It makes people feel heard and respected right from the start.
All right.
Okay, so we've talked about the mental prep, nailing those introductions, and making the most of those everyday speaking opportunities like meetings. Feels like we're building a pretty good toolkit. But now I'm curious, what about those speakers who, command top dollar, the ones who just captivate audiences effortlessly? Is it just raw talent, or is there something more to it?
It's not always raw talent. Tracy says a lot of it comes down to preparation. These speakers really understand their audience, they use stories well, they know how to pace themselves, and they use humor strategically.
So it's not about being some, naturally charismatic genius. It's about putting in the work.
Exactly. And here's something that really surprised me. Tracy says the best speakers often spend more time prepping for shorter talks.
Wait, really? That seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't a longer talk require more prep?
You'd think so, right? But think about it. When you only have a limited amount of time, every word, every sentence has to count.
It's like writing a haiku. You've got to make every syllable carry weight.
Perfect analogy. And I think that applies even beyond, formal speeches.
Yeah.
Even in a meeting, if you really think through your points beforehand, it can make a huge difference in how you come across.
Preparation breeds confidence. That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of connecting with the audience, Tracy's a big fan of using stories.
Oh, absolutely. He says stories make information way more memorable and impactful than just dry facts.
It's like that old saying, facts tell, but stories sell.
Right. A good story can tap into our emotions, and that makes us care about the message so much more. Plus, let's be honest, stories are just more engaging to listen to. Who wants to sit through a boring lecture when you can hear a compelling story?
Exactly. And Tracy gives some great tips on how to tell stories effectively. Choosing the right anecdote, building suspense, ending with a punchline. He also talks about how top speakers often weave humor into their storytelling. It's like a little gift to the audience,
Okay.
Shared moment of laughter.
It can definitely lighten the mood, and it builds rapport, but I guess the key is it can't just be any random joke, right?
Right.
Tracy says the humor has to be relevant to your message and appropriate for your audience.
Of course, you don't want to offend anyone or, distract from your main point.
Exactly. Humor is like any other tool. You have to use it strategically. Speaking of tools, Tracy talks about something he calls the unsung hero of a good speech. It's something even experienced speakers sometimes overlook: the room itself.
Oh, the room. I once gave a presentation in this stuffy, dimly lit room, and it was so distracting.
It's easy to forget about those little details, but they can make or break a speech. You just reminded me of something Tracy says. Hotels lie?
Wait, what? Hotels lie.
Yeah, he's talking about how hotels promise a certain room setup, but then you get there and the sound system is terrible, the lighting is awful, the temperature's stifling. We've all been there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And those things don't just affect the speaker, they impact the audience too. Even if they don't realize it, those factors can make them way less receptive to your message.
So what can we do about it? How do we take control and make sure the room works for us?
Well, Tracy has tons of advice on this, but one of his most memorable points is about lighting. He says it needs to be bright enough to see a zit from the back row.
Okay, that's a visual I won't forget. I'll never look at stage lighting the same way again.
Right. It's funny, but it highlights a serious point. The audience needs to be able to see you clearly to connect with you.
Okay, so we've talked about managing our pre-speech jitters, nailing those introductions, and even controlling the room. But there's this other thing, this magic moment when a speaker really nails it. They're totally in the zone, and the audience is captivated. What creates those moments?
Tracy calls this audience rapport. It's about building a genuine connection, creating a sense of trust and understanding between you and the audience.
It's like building a bridge from the stage to the seats.
Exactly. And he gives some great tips on how to build that bridge, using inclusive language, making eye contact, sharing personal stories that make you relatable.
So it's less about being a polished performer and more about being a real, genuine human being.
Precisely. But let's be real, not every speaking situation is a TED Talk. How do we apply these same principles in more everyday settings, like meetings or presentations at work?
That's the question. Do we really need that same level of, intensity for a quick team update?
I think the core principles still apply, even if the scale is different. It's about bringing that same passion, energy, that same connection and authenticity to all of our communication.
Even if it's just a small group of colleagues.
Exactly. When we communicate with intention, we create a more positive and productive environment. So it's not really about the size of the stage, it's about the mindset you bring. And that's what's so empowering about Speak to Win, I think. Tracy shows us that anyone can become a better communicator.
We just got to practice and put those principles into action.
Exactly. The more we do it, the more confident and skillful we become.
Speaking of confidence, let's be honest, even the best speakers can get nervous before they, take the stage. Does Tracy have any advice for those pre-speech jitters?
He does. He has a ton of techniques. But here's one that I find really helpful. Shift your focus from yourself to the audience.
Okay, so instead of thinking, what if I mess up? I should be thinking.
How can I provide value to these people? What do I want them to take away from this?
Turn the spotlight outwards instead of inwards.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off of you, and it helps you connect with the audience in a more genuine way.
Which, at the end of the day, is what makes a speech great. Okay, so we've shifted our focus. We're feeling confident. But there's this other element that I think people often overlook, the power of silence. Tracy talks about this in terms of vocal mastery.
Oh, yes, he does. And it's so important, but so often neglected.
We're almost afraid of those quiet moments, But Tracy argues that silence can actually be a really powerful tool.
Absolutely. He talks about using pauses strategically for emphasis, for dramatic effect, to give the audience time to process what you're saying. It's like those rests in music, They give shape to the melody.
It's like giving everyone a mental breathing room.
Exactly. It helps the speaker, too, to slow down and really connect with the message.
I love how he compares it to white space in a painting. It's not empty space, it's essential to the composition. So silence is our friend, not our enemy. But before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I have one more question. Tracy's really big on clear summaries at the end of a speech. But how do you do that well? About being repetitive. How do you distill your message down to its essence without boring the audience?
That's a great point. And Tracy has some good advice here. He says focus on the most important takeaways, use clear and concise language, and reinforce those points with stories or anecdotes. You're not just restating facts, you're weaving them into a memorable narrative.
You're tying a beautiful ribbon around the whole package.
Exactly. A strong summary can be the difference between a speech that people forget as soon as it's over and one that really sticks with them. Now, speaking of making a speech memorable, one thing that Tracy doesn't shy away from is the physicality of speaking.
It's easy to forget that speaking isn't just about the words we say. It's also about how our bodies communicate those words.
And Tracy says that body language can either help or hurt your message.
I love how he talks about owning the space, not being arrogant, but just projecting confidence. Do you remember any specific tips he had?
Oh, tons. Standing tall, making eye contact, using purposeful movements and gestures. I think he even said something like, walk as if you own the room and the room will be yours.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
So we got to walk tall, own the space, use our bodies to amplify our message. Okay, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to think back to the most captivating speakers you've ever seen, the ones who really inspired you. What was it about them that made them so effective?
That's a fantastic question, and one that I think is worth some serious reflection.
Absolutely. And we'll explore that very question in part 3 of our deep dive. So we left off talking about those truly captivating speakers, the ones who just have that it factor.
Yeah.
What makes them so effective? What sets them apart?
That's a great question, and I think if we can figure out what makes those speakers so compelling, it can help all of us become better communicators.
Right. Like if we can crack the code, we can all level up our speaking game.
Exactly. So let's think back for a minute to those speakers who really blew you away. What qualities did they have that made them so effective?
Oh, I'm thinking,
Hmm.
when I picture those speakers, the first thing that comes to mind is passion. Like they weren't just delivering information, they were sharing something they really believed in.
Yeah, passion is huge. It felt like they were giving a piece of themselves, sharing a conviction that resonated with the audience.
They were on fire. And that fire was contagious.
It is. It makes you, as an audience member, want to lean in and listen. And I think that passion often translates into energy, enthusiasm. They're present, engaged. They're excited to be sharing their message.
It's like they're having a conversation, not just giving a lecture.
Exactly. They're inviting the audience to come along on a journey, and that makes all the difference, right?
Totally. It's so much more compelling than just sitting there passively receiving information.
Yeah, I agree. It's that sense of connection, that shared experience that makes those speakers so memorable. It's not just about what they're saying, it's about how they make you feel.
They create an experience, not just a presentation. And this isn't just for TED Talks or, big speeches.
Absolutely not. This
Yeah.
applies to any speaking situation.
Right, right. Okay, so we've got passion, energy, connection. What else? Any other qualities that come to mind?
Authenticity. Those speakers who really captivate us, they're comfortable being themselves. They're not trying to be someone they're not, and that's incredibly appealing.
It's like they're giving the audience permission to be themselves, too.
Exactly. And that creates trust and rapport. And I think that's essential for any kind of communication to be truly effective.
Okay, so we're aiming for passion, energy, connection, and authenticity. Sounds like a recipe for a truly captivating speaking experience. But let's be real, not every situation calls for, like, a TED Talk level of intensity. What about everyday things like meetings at work or presentations to a small group of colleagues? Can we apply those same principles there?
Absolutely. The context might be different, but the principles are still the same. You can bring that same passion, energy, connection, and authenticity to those interactions too.
Even if it's just a quick team update, it still matters.
Exactly. When we communicate with intention, with that presence, we make the whole interaction more positive, more productive.
It's not about the size of the stage or the formality of the occasion. It's about our mindset.
I love that. And that's one of the most powerful takeaways from Speak to Win, in my opinion. It shows us that we can all become more effective communicators.
It's about taking these principles and putting them into action.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the more confident and skillful we'll become.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about conquering those pre-speech jitters, crafting compelling introductions, even controlling the room itself. Brian Tracy has given us so many practical insights to help us become more confident, more persuasive speakers.
It's a book that's packed with wisdom, that's for sure. And I think anyone can benefit from it.
I agree. So as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. What's one small step you can take today to become a more confident and persuasive speaker?
That's a great question.
Maybe it's practicing your next presentation in front of a mirror, or weaving a personal story into your next meeting, or consciously using the power of the pause.
Love it.
Whatever it is, the key is to take action. Because as Brian Tracy says, speaking is a skill. And like any skill, it improves with practice.
So true. And remember, it's a journey. Be patient with yourself, embrace the challenges, and celebrate those wins along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, the world needs your voice. So speak up, speak with confidence, and speak to win.